Welcome back everybody to the Wandering Samurai Study, in which we review and analyze every single act told in Rurouni Kenshin, and today's act is Act 74, Arrival in Kyoto. Yahiko and Kaoru are in this chapter very briefly, and there's not a whole lot to say, so I'm going to talk about them now. Really, them being here, it's to kind of just reintroduce them into the story. Kenshin's in Kyoto. Hey, just FYI, so is Kaoru and so is Yahiko. And it's also kind of like setting up Aoshi too, because it's like, hey, remember that whole thing about like Misao wanting to find Aoshi? Well, it's coming. Aoshi's in Kyoto too. It's all kind of like just reintroducing the characters back into the story after kind of being absent for a minute. It's all of the pieces that were set up just few 7-8 chapters ago. I just miss Yahiko. I love this little interaction that I don't think is in the anime, where Yahiko is so perplexed and so puzzled by the females in Kyoto and their obsession with this foreign dog. I think it was a dog. And that he's just like, oh, it just sounds like gibberish to me, you know? And I think that all of that is just to kind of set up that Kyoto is a very different place from Tokyo. That the culture that Yahiko is familiar with is not present here in Kyoto. And I think it's a pretty interesting distinction that should be made early on, and I think that this is how the author found his way to make it in a comedic way, and through Yahiko, which I always very much appreciate. But let's get into the chapter summary review, and we'll get into the rest of the arrival in Kyoto. Kenshin and Misao finally arrive in Kyoto. The two make their way to Misao's home, and Kenshin gets connected with Okina, the former leader of the Oniwaban in Kyoto. Okina confirms his suspicions about Shishio with Kenshin and offers to aid Kenshin during his time in Kyoto. Elsewhere, Kaoru and Yahiko also arrive in Kyoto and find Aoshi walking through the busy streets. Kenshin accepts Okina's help under the condition that he help him find two men, Arai Shaku and Hiko Seijuru. Alright, so I think that this might be like a short and sweet kind of chapter. There's really two things that I kind of want to focus on, and that is Kenshin arriving in Kyoto and the Oniwaban of Kyoto. So let's go ahead and start off with Kenshin arriving in Kyoto. Early on in the chapter, Kenshin mentions that it's been 10 years since he's began wandering, and he's wandered everywhere else except for Kyoto. He never imagined that he actually stepped foot back into this city. And I think that this really just emphasizes, as far as the Kyoto arc goes, it really emphasizes just how badly he does not want to be here, and how badly he does not want to do this. And I think that it kind of goes back to when we were back in Shingetsu Village and how he was kind of ready to take on Shishio there. I think that it might have been Kenshin's opportunity to kind of like, all right, let's settle this here, and maybe I'll never have to go back to Kyoto. But you know, that's not how it goes, and it's, you know, kind of like the main character trying to avoid the, you know, the hero's journey, or the call to action. You know, I mean, he accepted the call, but he doesn't want to see it through to the end. And you know, I think that that's a layer in the hero's journey, like this reluctance, like midway through. I don't know, but you know, nonetheless, Kenshin is here, and that's kind of like his character arc through Kyoto. It's just him continuously having to accept to do things that he doesn't really want to do. Another thing that I want to mention about this, though, is that I think that the author is really kind of taking the moment to kind of set up Jinchu as early as here, because he mentions that he's wandered everywhere else but Kyoto. And on the surface, before knowing about Jinchu and the story that takes place in Jinchu, you can kind of just leave it up to the fact that this is where the revolution took place. But once you actually kind of know about Kenshin's backstory, and this is kind of like your second, or, you know, a repeated read through, or you know, a second read, I guess, a third, a subsequential read, a subsequential read, that Kyoto actually holds bitter memories for Kenshin for very personal reasons, and not just having it be as generalized as this is where the war took place, this is where he was at, this is where he carried out his assassinations. I think it's set up as early as here. But before we could even linger on that, the author kind of shifts our attention back away from this and kind of like generalizes like, yeah, the Bakumatsu took place in Kyoto, or Kyoto was a big setting during the Bakumatsu, and a lot of people suffered in Kyoto, and there's a reason that a lot of people wouldn't want to be here. He kind of takes the focus away from Kenshin, kind of generalizes it to kind of remind us that, like, yeah, there was a war that took place, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Kenshin. It's a bad place for a lot of people who grew up in Kyoto during that era. And I think that was kind of smart, because Jinchu is ways off, and we're like nowhere near ready to deal with it. Alright, so let's get into the Kyoto Oniwaban. I don't think that I ever really realized until this read of the Kyoto arc, or this chapter, that the Oniwaban don't really exist in Kyoto. Like, they're kind of a disbanded group as far as the Kyoto branch is concerned. And of course, you know what happened to Aoshi and his men. But the Oniwaban in Kyoto seem to be kind of, retired. And it shows in Okina, but I think that it gives us a really solid view of Aoshi's Oniwaban group and why they left Misao specifically here and went off to search for glory elsewhere. Because in peacetime Kyoto, there really isn't a whole lot going on for Aoshi to have his moment of glory, which is kind of ironic because he's returned to the city just to get that glory. And of course, Okina still having his connections to the underground rumblings that occur within the city, or having his ear close to the ground, makes sense, because you never really leave that lifestyle. Like, once you develop a craft or a skill, you kind of continue to do it, even if it becomes kind of a background thing in your everyday life. And I think that him being a spy network, it is important to know what's going on in the city because of like situations such as the one that we're in now with Shishio and stuff. So I think it's really cool that the Oniwaban functions but doesn't really function, and it's found a way to kind of live a peaceful life in the peaceful city but still kind of have its feet in the water. And kind of circling back to Aoshi and the Oniwaban of Kyoto, I already kind of mentioned that it makes sense that they left Misao here. It's a peaceful place. They'll know that she's safe here with Okina, and that there's not a whole lot going on while they go out in search of glory. But I think that the vibe that the Kyoto Oniwaban have is it's so much more friendlier and so much more inviting and caring, that it kind of circles out that group itself that we encountered back in during the Konryu conflict. In that these aren't just muscle men who are just standing, obstacles for Kenshin to get to Megumi. These are now like more humanized characters because they come from a family, or they come from people that care about them and who are caring people and good people who are naturally just living their lives. It's just that this group of people set out on a very specific reasons for leaving Kyoto, and kind of mixed them with like maybe the wrong crowd for like the wrong reasons, but nonetheless they still come back from people that care about them. And I think that it just also kind of validates why Misao cares about Aoshi and the Edo Oniwaban group, because they kind of all grew up together in this very caring place. And even though we saw them as antagonists, she didn't. She grew up with caring people, and that includes them, even though they left. And, she doesn't know about any of that. Again, having this group be so caring and so loving, it also kind of explains why the Edo Oniwaban, or Aoshi's Oniwaban, is so caring for each other. They had this tight camaraderie until the very end because they were ostracized by the rest of society, but the Oniwaban really cares for its people, and it's shown here in the Kyoto branch as well, that the Oniwaban is a place to call home. It's a place for family, for people who don't have families to be a part of one. And I think that it's just this whole approach for the Oniwaban in Kyoto just makes a lot of sense. And I think that it like just really solidifies this group as like, hey, you know what, maybe the way I thought about them back then does not match the way that they actually are, because here's another branch who is maybe completely opposite, but then you can kind of go back and look at it just slightly a little bit different and realize, oh dang, yeah, these are, I could see where they're coming from. I can see how they are. It's a little bit of like retconning, I think, but I think it only helps to better the characters and the story. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got for Arrival in Kyoto. And this is Act 74 of Rurouni Kenshin. If you like this video and you want to see more, then consider subscribing to the channel, leave a thumbs up, and comment down below something that you enjoyed about this chapter. I enjoyed Yahiko just because I love Yahiko. I don't really have anything to say about Aoshi being here, but it's just, like I said, it's for him to be reintroduced into the story, but really the focus is the actual Kyoto Oniwaban and Kenshin. That's all I really have for you guys. I'll see you guys all in the comment section down below. Bye, ciao.
あら